Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Hamlin. I'm the Head of Customer Experience for Fairvine Super. We are a fintech-based superannuation company that has the aim of helping women improve their retirement outcomes by using our savings tools. So I want to talk to you today about from transactional journeys to relationships. So it's a very interesting area and something that I have a little bit of experience in, quite a bit of experience actually, God help me. So my bio is really that I've had 22 years in aviation. I was the Sydney Airport Manager of Guest Services and the Sydney Manager of Cabin Crew, both international and domestic. I was working as the head of customer for a global NGO, World Animal Protection. And then I was the general manager of a luxury wellness retreat, which taught me a great deal of things, a great number of things. And chief of those, amongst those, was how to deal with a non-functioning septic tank. So live and learn, hey? And I'm now the head of customer experience at Fairvine Super. So what I wanted to talk to you guys about today is how to move from transaction to relationship. Really, that's it in a nutshell. I have a breadth of experience with automation. I've always loved automation. I've always loved the idea of making life easier for customers, for human beings, and that automation can do that. And it's really interesting that I think a lot of people, when they hear automation, they automatically hear job loss and redundancies and so on. And interestingly, that's not really what's been happening. What tends to happen is that people move into different areas, because once you get into automation, things like data become increasingly important. Things like tech become increasingly important. So it's really just a shift of those resources. I realize that is probably a gross simplification, and a gross simplification of some of the experiences that I'm sure you have had over the years of redundancies and so on, particularly in the last year. Certainly, it's an underestimation of how that has impacted on people, in my world as well. But I think more broadly, I think we need to be less afraid of automation and start focusing on upskilling and reskilling those team members into areas that are potentially more suited for them anyway. I want to talk about how to start the journey of automating transactional customer functions. So, those really basic transactional things like changing addresses or, updating the number of kids they have, or, there's a whole bunch of things that will be, I guess, very transactional in your space. And, if you think of them, jot them down, because certainly that's something that is really the crux of what I'm talking about here, is moving away from those sort of transactional stuff and moving into giving our teams more leeway to meet our customers' needs. There is a great deal of thought given to how we do this. And, obviously AI is increasingly a part of this. That's the topic of another conversation. But what I will say from the human element of this, the human side of this, is that increasingly the expectation from our customers is that they can do transactional stuff online or in some kind of automated way, and that they really only contact us and actually speak to an actual human being when there is something that is not straightforward for them to solve. And at that time, they want to feel listened to. At that time, they want to be assisted, and they want to have their problem solved pretty much on the spot. They also want to have somebody who is authentically engaged with them, somebody who gives off the vibe, if you like, that they really want to help them, that they get a sense that this person is really trying to support and help them as a customer. And that's where real customer satisfaction comes from. then how to transition your team to customer heroes as opposed to customer service professionals. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, because that concept is something that has, I guess, been a part of my customer service journey since I was 18 years old, so 30 odd years now. Was really about understanding what the difference is between a customer hero and customer service. How to stay on brand while shifting the focus. Obviously, if you've got a brand that is around providing strong, solid, good customer service for your customers, a question from a lot of people when we talk about automation and we start focusing on automation within an organization is, but how are we going to provide that good customer service for somebody? And I'll talk about expectation, because I think expectation is a really, really big part of that. And then how to figure out what they all want, how to get the data, where is the data coming from? How do I actually make time for this? And I guess, as a bit of a spoiler alert, really it's about making time. It's about proving to your resourcing team and potentially your CFO the value and the actual data-driven value of working focus group time into your frontline team's roles. So by which I mean you spending time with them and pulling information from them, and actually being able to get that as a data-based, evidence-based proposal to these people. All right. So I guess I'll start by talking about, I guess, a little concept that I want to get across to you, which is let's start by thinking about banking. So 30 years ago, when I got my first real job, and I had to deposit checks, would you believe? Only 30 years ago. And I actually had to deposit checks into the bank. And I remember I used to have to physically take my check into the bank and give it to the teller and put it across the counter and then wait 3 or 4 days for that check to clear. And then a few years later, maybe a year later, the bank ATMs started accepting checks before they only accepted cash for deposits. And that was life-changing for me, because it meant that I could do it on the way home from a shift, and I was a nurse back then, and I could do it on the way home from a nursing shift on payday when I got my little envelope at work. I would be able to go straight to the bank on my way home and bank that, and then it would be processed first thing in the morning, and da-di-da-di-da. If you'd asked me back then, was it hard? Was it hard to make a deposit? I would have said no. Was it hard to go into the bank and put I would have said no, not at all. But then if you'd asked me a year later, when I was able to put this in into the ATM at 3 o'clock in the morning when my shift finished, would it be hard to go into the bank? I would have said, oh yeah, absolutely. What a pain. And I guess where I'm going with that is, industry drives expectation. Our industries and our competitors drive expectation. Innovation drives expectation, customer expectation. I guess one of the things that I want to talk about as well is like how to stay on top of automation. And probably the best place to start for that, if it's not something that is, this does need to be spelled out sometimes, make sure that you are reading industry newsletters. Make sure that you are staying up to date with the industry information that is out there, whether that be subscribing to your competitors' newsletters, and I'll come back to that because I think that's an important thing. But, subscribe to newsletters. And not just subscribe to them, but manage them, curate them. You could end up with, 50 newsletters in your inbox every single day, and you will miss the gold because you're too busy to read them. But certainly for me, I make 20 minutes at the start of my day to read and unsubscribe to certain industry newsletters and search for new ones. So, you've obviously got your industry. In my case, it's things like, the Financial Standard and that kind of thing. But that will tell you where to go and where to look and where those changes are coming. But I guess, to not go on about it, stay on top of this. It is part of your job to stay on top of automation. It is part of your job to stay on top of your industry and your sector's advancements and technological advancements. It is part of your job. And to make that work for you, I know that for me, that means I have to subscribe to new ones, unsubscribe from old ones, and really curate, reduce the amount, the volume or the frequency from certain organizations as well of those newsletters. So that's a really, really critical factor. Oh, this one. Watch your competitors. My God. It's interesting when you actually go into your CRM and you see how many of your competitors will happily subscribe to your newsletters and to your updates and like your Facebook page. And they're not even shy about saying that they're from another organization, from a competitor. Don't be shy to be that person either. And what I will say about this is, your competitors will raise the expectations. So when I was talking before about the banking thing, you better believe that when I was in New Zealand, we had big four banks, the big four banks as well, similarly. But when I was in New Zealand, you better believe that when one bank introduced the ability to do a deposit through an ATM, the other three banks followed suit very, very quickly. So your competitors will create expectation from your customers, and they will ask, why aren't you doing this? And they won't just ask that, they'll go somewhere where they can do this. That is the risk. So if you need to keep a folder about what your competitors are doing, store those newsletters in there, then knock yourself out. This is part of your job. Never, ever be afraid to do this. It's part of your job. Reading newsletters, staying up to date with industry, updates and so on and so forth. It is part of your job. I cannot emphasize that highly enough. And the reason I say keep a folder about your competitors is because there have been a number of occasions in my career where I have needed to present to the board, investors, the executive, my manager, etc., why I require this investment from them. This is why I require the investment in automation, because automation is not always cheap, almost pretty much not ever cheap. And this is what, this is how I do that, is by having this folder that's about what my competitors are doing, so that I have it all right in front of me at my fingertips. So I can say, well, X super fund is doing this, or X charitable organization is doing this, or X airline is doing this. We need to be doing it too, because if we're not, we're going to be left behind. So yeah, that would be something I would definitely recommend. Be the little kid in the emperor's new clothes. This is kind of an interesting one for me. It's a concept that I guess I came across very early on in my career, and it was introduced to us. So it's actually during my nursing training, where they talked about, being the whistleblower, if you like. But it's sort of a little bit more than being a whistleblower. It's about putting that customer lens on. And I know we talk a lot about customer lens in this environment, but when you can actually step out of your role and step out of your, take that I am the head of customer experience, or whatever, the chief customer officer, whatever that title is, take that off, put it down here and say, I am a customer. I need to look at this. An example of this is in superannuation. We talk a lot about consolidation and rollovers, and they are two different things. But it's very easy to work that into your language, and it's very easy for your teams to work that into their language when they're talking to customers as well. And forget that consolidation and rollovers, for example, don't really mean anything to your average customer who's calling you. You know, people don't know much about this kind of thing. So really think about that kind of stuff when you're doing it. An example of this really for me is probably the largest automation program that I have ever spearheaded. And that was when I was working at Sydney Airport in ground ops. And I'd come from cabin crew. I'd been in the cabin crew department for, I'd say probably I've been working in the cabin crew department for 15 years. And I was the manager of cabin crew for Sydney for international and domestic. Had about 2,500 people working for me, and had, you know, been cabin crew myself. I really, really seriously knew everything really there was to know about being cabin crew. I knew how it worked. It was intuitive, it was instinctive. And in a program of succession training, I was moved to the role in ground operations. I'd never worked in ground operations. I really had, the only idea I had about ground operations was how it interacted with cabin crew, you know, the actual at the door of the aircraft. That's pretty much all I knew at that point. So when I arrived at the airport, because I did a lot of flying myself, obviously, it was part of the job. I noticed that we had these, the boarding pass printers, you know, the stand-up boarding pass printers that you probably all, you know, way across by now. You've all used them a million times, where you check yourself in and you print out your own boarding pass and you print out your own bag tags. Now, we had gotten to the place where we were printing our own boarding passes, but our competitors were printing their own bag tags, and their passengers, their customers, were bag tagging their own bags, right? Bear with me. It's going somewhere. And I looked at the machine that we had, and it was the same as the machine that one of our competitors had. And I said to our general manager of airports, I was like, so why aren't we doing this? And he said, I don't honestly know. So then I asked the logistics person, the operations person, you know, why aren't we doing? And the answer was because we just don't. And I guess the customer experience people, when I spoke to them about it, they said, oh yeah, because we want our teams to be welcoming all of our customers all of the time. You know, we never want it to become a faceless experience. And I remember at the time, because obviously my head was very much in automation, I remember at the time thinking, okay, well, that's interesting. But what do our customers want? Do our customers want that? Does that mean they have to stand in queues longer just so they can speak to a person who can check them in a 30-second interaction that is just pure transaction, nothing else? I then also noticed at the same time that there was and I guess that we were seeing mistakes, and we were seeing check-in mistakes from our teams and boarding mistakes from our teams, our frontline teams. And those mistakes were remaining static in spite of all of the things that our safety teams were trying to do, and all of the different education and all of the ways that we were handling this. Those mistakes were staying the same. So, you know, this is where I'm like, get curious about this, guys. Walk the floor, get curious, talk to your teams about it. Because when I got curious about this and started talking to my teams, I discovered that those team members who were making these mistakes were unable to remember when they had made that error. They had this experience where they had 30 people in front of them in a massive queue, or 100 people in front of them, depending on the time of the day, you know, busy periods. There was a massive queue out the door, and they were just focused on getting through this check-in process as quickly as possible. And what that results in is that they had no interaction with this person other than, may I see your boarding pass? Can I see your ID? Can I do, you know, and it was like just looking at a computer the whole time, trying to get them through so that they could get through this. And I guess the crux of what I'm saying is that we had customers who weren't really having their needs met because they were waiting in queues. And we had staff who were not getting any kind of real interaction with real human beings. So I dug a little deeper, and this is I guess an area that I think is important for us to understand, is about really winning the hearts and minds of our team members. And look, again, these are concepts that we've all talked about ad infinitum, but the reason we talk about them a lot is because they work. Talking to your teams and making time for those focus groups, actually talking to your resource planners and saying, I want once a week 10 minutes with 10 people or 5 people or whatever that looks like in your organization, and actually talking to them about, ask 2 questions. What do you think our customers want? What makes you happy at work? And the reason I say that is because, I was fortunate in that I was able to dedicate a lot more time to that. But what makes a customer service professional, a customer service worker, happy at work? Is it a transaction? Is it, this is how you change the address? Is it, this is how, I'll change your address for you. Oh, this is, and oh, you've had an extra child. Okay, I'll add that to your life insurance. Whatever that looks like, whatever those transactional things that we're talking about look like. And, in my case, it tends to be, in the case of superannuation, it's, how much, what is my balance, or, that kind of very, very transactional kind of thing. I've changed my address, I don't know, whatever. What is it that makes them happy? Yes, and we'll come back to the data thing of like, what are our customers really saying? What's their experience really like? And how you ask that question is important too. But actually saying to your team, what makes you happy at work? But don't use that question. Say, when you get in your car at the end of the day, or you get on the bus at the end of the day, or you go home at the end of the day, and you think back on your day, what does a good day look like? And then get them to answer that. Because for most of our customer service professionals, a good day actually looks like really genuinely helping somebody. And when I asked, so I'm now talking about having spoken to 350 of my team members, 2,500 of my team members and cabin crew, really spending just a short period of time with them and planting the seed. You're not just asking the question for your own data, you're planting the seed for part of your transitional program to automation. You're saying to these people, what is it that essentially, what is it that feeds you? What is it that makes you feel good? What is it that makes you go, yeah, I did a good job today? Don't necessarily ask it like that. It depends on how, I guess, the level of engagement with your team, and you'd have to obviously figure that one out for yourself. But don't ask the negative question, what makes you feel bad? Ask the positive question, always the positive question. What makes you feel good at work? Not necessarily like that either, but, as I say, make sure that you're asking that question. And you will be surprised. It is almost always when I've been able to help somebody who needed help, when I've been able to do something good. Of course, there will be a few people who will say things like, I got off early and was able to come back late from lunch or whatever. That's fine. You deal with that and have a laugh about it. But actually, again, it's not really about data gathering. This is about planting the seed. So, the other thing that I would really, really say is important is to really, really use your resources. We have got amazing people in our organizations who deal with data. Now, I would be surprised if any of us here are in this role because we are very good at data. You may be. Take my hat off to you. I'm definitely not that person. But I do make sure that I keep good relationships and maintain good relationships with the people who work in the data team. Certainly for me, this is about making sure that I am always popping in to say hello to the data people, to the investment people, to the various different parts of the organization that can be helpful to us. And, use your resources. You will have data people who can help you figure out the data stuff. Oh God, anticipate detours. 100% anticipate detours. So when I was when I was doing this program, obviously what we were looking at is getting self-bag tagging going. So what we wanted the people to do was to print out their own bag tags and then attach them to their own bags. And then really the only interaction that they needed with our team was to pass the bag over. There was no requirement for them to do any checking at all. They just passed the bag over. And it was really just about then moving our team members out from behind the desk and getting them onto the floor so that they were, roaming the floor and looking to help people through the process. I say anticipate detours because we ordered at the stage that we decided that we were going to do this, the procurement team decided as well that they were going to source new stationery, by which I mean new bag tags. And unfortunately, the bag tags that they sourced from a cheaper provider had the wrong grade of glue on them, and it mucked up all the machines. So it absolutely set the whole program back quite significantly. Boy, did I learn a lesson from that one. And I think it's a lesson that probably Dan Andrews has recently learned as well, which is you in many ways, you do need to know the details. You can't just say, you take care of that. You take care of bag tags. You take care of hotel detention. You can't do that. You really do need to be across the finer details, and asking the questions that need to be asked if you're going through if you are leading the automation program. I guess, as I say, expect detours, definitely. And, look, 100% through this process, you will have, I guess, customers and people who are very anti this. Of course you will. There will always be a number of people who want to talk to an actual human being to change their address. But the reality is, and one of the ways that you can actually really sell this to your team is that they might change 20 addresses a day, right? They might take 20 phone calls to change addresses every day. But for that person, they're only changing it once every few years, potentially, once every 20 years. So the likelihood that they're going to get that wrong is very, very low. The likelihood that your staff member is going to get something wrong is a little bit higher, because just the sheer volume that they're doing and the personal investment is lower for them because they're not changing their own address. So, the other thing I'll say about this is you will have, I guess you will have adopters and non-adopters within your customer group. But I guess the drive to adopt is increasingly high. So the drive for people to adopt is increasingly high. I look at my in-laws, for example, who don't anymore. They do all of their stuff online. They do change their addresses and so on and so forth online. They don't have that level of trust to do their banking online. They still physically go into the bank from time to time. But that the gap between these guys is widening. But I will say this, that even non-adopters, even slow adopters, expect efficiency. They do get used to things, and they get used to it slowly. An example of this is when we were at the airport, when we were doing this, there were people who would become very irate almost at the idea that they had to tag their own bags. And I guess the way that you deal with that, and it's the same, as I say, I pulled people out from behind the desks, put them on the floor, right? So that they were now circulating. So then they were able to help these people, the non-adopters, and it becomes more targeted. So if you make it easy to change your address through automation online on a customer portal so that they don't have to call you about it, then the people who are comfortable with that will do that. The people who aren't comfortable with that will continue to call you. You can target your care to those people. And arguably, because your team are less stressed and have less pressure on them, arguably, and they don't get 30 of these phone calls a day, arguably they're going to be happier and more content and more engaged and happier to do this. Empower your team, be clear about limits. So I want to just have a quick word about what I mean by the hero concept. So there's an amazing woman called Janelle Barlow. She wrote a book called A Complaint is a Gift, I think in about 1994 or something. It's quite a long time ago, but truth is truth. And it's a book that I give to every one of my new customer service employees. And fundamentally what she talks about is the fact that you don't actually gain customer loyalty by meeting people's expectations. Where you gain customer loyalty is by saving them from a situation. So what we had with the self-bag tagging was we would have a couple come in who were very, didn't know what they were doing. They didn't like this. They didn't know what to do. The team were on the lookout and roaming the floor and conscious of the fact that there were people. They were able to see these people because they weren't just sitting behind a desk typing madly. They were actually like engaging and looking around and being engaged with their environment and with their customers. So these team members were empowered to go up to these people and help them with the bag tagging process. And all of a sudden that experience for these customers becomes, I was helped. I couldn't do this thing. I was scared. I was confused. I was angry. I was disappointed. But actually then a lovely person came up to me and was kind to me and polite to me and didn't make me feel stupid and helped me with this. And that is the sweet spot. That is the sweet spot for what you want. And I can assure you that you use a lot fewer staff to do that kind of thing. And this is our modeling was like this at the airport, and more so, the reality actually was even better. That actually the staff satisfaction went up, the customer satisfaction went up, and I can give you all the stats if you want. But anyway, suffice it to say that they did, and the I guess the speed through the airport increased. There were none of these backlogs. There was none of this, and what that looks like from a contact center perspective, which I saw at the NGO when I implemented a similar thing at the NGO, was that there was no longer a queue of, you are 30th in line. We anticipate answering your question or answering your call in 8 minutes. That kind of goes away because your staff aren't caught up with this stuff. Oh, walk the floor, walk the floor, walk the floor. I think you know this. And that is, again, as I was saying, about actually engaging with your team and understanding the things that they know that we don't know, because a lot of the time they know a hell of a lot more. And the question is not, what can we do to make your job better? That's a valuable question, but not for these particular focus groups that I'm recommending you try and work into your resource plan for 10 people for 10 minutes a week, 5 people for 10 minutes a week even, or 2 lots of 5 for 10 minutes a week. Just, talk to your people, or even just to walk the floor and see them. But, I guess what I'm recommending is that you ask, what do you think our customers want? What do our customers want? Not what do you want? What do you think needs to change? Ask them specifically, what do you see that our customers want? It's a very, very important question. And this is the best piece of advice I was ever given. And it actually works from both the employee's perspective, from an investor's perspective, from a talking to the board perspective, from a challenging political situation at work conversation perspective. Put the customer in the middle, because if you are always coming back to what the customer needs and what that customer's experience is like and how is this going to affect the customer, you simply can't go wrong. You cannot go wrong. You know, I know that when you're talking to a one of your team members and you talk to them about such and such an experience, and you say to them, well, what do you think the customer's experience was like? And they might, you know, there'll be a little bit of backwards and forwards potentially, there'll be a little bit of angst potentially, but actually when you can bring it back to them, but yeah, what did the customer think? But what do you think the customer thought when you put your hand over the receiver and talk to your mate and they could hear you? What do you think the customer thought? How do you think that made the customer feel? So always putting the customer in the middle of everything, that is probably the key piece of advice I can give you, because this is going to be at every level. If you are going to go through an automation process, I can promise you're going to be talking to people at pretty much every level of your organization, whether that be the CFO, the CEO. You know, I remember talking to the board about this automation program, and you know, here I was, just a, you know, like a sort of a little old airport manager, not even the top of the pops in that field, and I was talking to the board about why we should be doing this. And you know, if I hadn't had the ability to say, well, the customers want this, if I hadn't done the research, the customers want this, the customers are telling us this is what Qantas are doing, this is what the other lot are doing, this is what these lot are doing. If I hadn't been able to do all of that, because this is what our customers now expect, it would have fallen flat in its face. And it was a lot less scary. So please reach out to me if you've got any questions, or if you want to talk about any of the things that I'm talking about more. I'm on LinkedIn. Obviously, these guys have got my details as well. But, you know, I really appreciate you listening to me and taking the time to hear what I've got to say. I am very passionate about this topic, and it's great to have somebody that will actually listen to me. Have a great day.